Hi, this is Lauren. Today I'm actually going to show you how to create hats on our awesome Loopdeloom. So it's actually pretty simple and easy steps to do. And there's a couple different variations of hats that you can make. The process itself, they are not very different. Today in our video that I'm actually going to show you, I'm going to show you how to make a cuffed hat with a really cool pom-pom embellishment on top. And then I'm going to actually show you too how to just make a very simple and plain hat that is just tied together and there is no sewing involved at all. So why don't we get started? Before you get started in actual weaving your hat, you need to determine what is the circumference of your head. It's very easily done by simply wrapping a piece of yarn around the widest part of your head and cutting off the measurement. Here I have already pre-cut my example that shows the circumference of my head, and you can do it like this. Right now, I just want to show you how long the circumference of my head had to actually weave on the loom. So what you're going to have to determine once you figure out your length, that's going to determine the length of how long you actually need to weave your piece, because the length is actually what's going to be wrapped around your actual head itself. Most hats need to be done on a double loom, and it's just two looms connected together, and I've already removed some of the pegs here from the loom of my weave, but as you can see, this loom is done the same exact way. A double loom is nice because it allows you to actually do more project itself. So once you have woven your length on the loom, all you're going to simply do is just remove all the yarn from your pegs. Once you have gone through and taken all the pegs and taken your weave off the actual loom itself, you're going to need to go back through and straighten and readjust your weave. Right now, I have already readjusted this weave. You can tell that my weave is a little bit more unique. I actually kind of used all the scrap blue and green or contrasting yarns that I had, and it actually weaves a really cool and unique pattern. My advice would be to try this at home. It really creates a very unique piece. So the first hat that I'm actually going to be demonstrating to do, and most hats are done exactly the same, is this is the only variation, is that this hat is going to have a cuff on the bottom of it. And we're going to do an embellishment later in the video of how to add a pom-pom or some cool flair. So once you're taking your weave again off the loom, make sure your messy side is on the back side and all your scrap yarn. We don't want this showing on the front of the hat, otherwise it'll make it look a little bit messy. But for what you're going to do, there's actually a couple steps of actually doing this. You can take both of your fringe here on each side of your weave and actually tie them together. Or you can actually tie off the ends and sew the ends into the hat itself. I'm actually going to demonstrate both ways today. And the first way that I'm going to do is show you guys how to tie off each side of your weave and sew in all the strings in the inside of the hat. So what you need to do first is that it's the same kind of protocol for each weave that you do. You need to gather a set of 3 strands of yarn together. Again, this is the same thing we usually do. You're going to loop around your finger, make a knot, tie them off. The reason why we do 3 strands is because you're taking a strand and 2 from each of the warps. You just don't want to tie the 2 together because it's actually not securing your weave enough. We don't want any of our weave coming undone, and this part is most necessary for that exact step. So I'm going to go ahead and knot off each side of my weave. And on the one side of your weave, don't forget to cut the loops at the end of your weave from when it was hanging on the warps itself. You need to have these separate so you can combine the 3 warp strings together. So we've gone in and tied off both sides of my weave, except at one end on each side of the weave, I left one pair of warp strings, not knotted. This reason being is that this is what's actually going to pull to create the top part of our hat. I just wanted to make a side note of that. So once you have knotted off each side, I'm actually going to show you really quickly how to sew in the fringe on the side of your hat and how to sew together your hat itself. This really makes a nice clean look. Again, like I said in the next hat demonstration that I'm going to do, I'm going to show simply just how to tie them together so there is no sewing involved at all. But this version is just in case that you want a nice clean finished looking hat. So when you're going and sewing your fringe in, make sure those knots are extremely tight. You're going to have to buy a wide-eyed needle, and these are sold at your local craft store in the yarn or sewing aisle. This is just a cheap plastic metal one, and I find it's very easy to use. So once you have tied off the end and made sure the knot is super tight, you're going to take that grouping of yarn and knot and pull it through the hole of your wide-eyed needle. And also, once you've gotten all those strands of yarn through, might have to do it a couple times to get it through, you're going to choose one of the warp columns. Now, this is what you're going to pull through the yarn. So choosing a warp column, you're going to slide your wide-eyed needle right through the center of it, and it should go actually through very, 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 very easily. And on a side note too, make sure you're pushing it through on the sloppy side of your weave because you will actually see the tail end of this. So again, pick one of those warp columns and your needle should not show through on the other side of your weave, and it shouldn't show through on the front side of your weave either. So push that wide-eyed needle through the column, and all you're going to do is just pull your yarn through. You can always stop in a nice comfortable ending point where the needle just won't go any further, and that's usually your note to know that that's far enough that you've gone. So again, all that I'm doing is I'm taking a grouping of 3, threading it through my wide-eyed needle, choosing a warp column, and sliding the needle through. That is all I am doing. So now you need to do that to both sides of your weave except leaving that one end that we did not knot off. Make sure that you actually leave that end and do not sew it in. So I'll be back in a flash. Once you have sewn in each side of your weave, all you're going to have to do, and even if you don't want to do this, you can just go ahead and finally trim off all that messy inside. Make sure that when you are tying or cutting off your strands from the weave, that you're not cutting them too close to the knot itself that you tied when you were weaving these strands in. So just go ahead and cut off the excess pieces of yarn that we tied in or sewed in from our weave itself. Once you've cut all your excess strings off, this is actually where the fun part begins. So remember those 2 pieces of warp strands that we left and did not knot in? This is actually where your hat starts to come alive itself. So you're going to take both ends of these string and you're going to pull from each side and pull a very tight circle in the top part of your weave. You might not be able to get it completely closed depending on how large your hat is or how thick the yarn you use. The thinner the yarn, the tighter the hole that it will create at the top. But later in this video, I'll show you how to embellish the top so you can actually kind of cover that hole and not see that when it's on the top of your head. So once you've done that and pulled as tight as you possibly can, you should be left with a long amount of these warp strands now. So all you're going to do is just create a knot and tie these 2 strands together. And that's it. That actually creates the top portion of your hat. Make sure you do a double knot so things do not come loose at all. And once you've done that, all you simply can do is then just cut it off. So now we're almost actually done with our hat. You can kind of see our hat is really starting to come alive now. We have one end completely done, and all we actually need to do now is sew one side only of our weave together. And that's actually what's going to create a really fun hat. So what you're going to do again is actually get out your wide-eye needle and pick a strand of yarn that you would like to use to sew the entire side together. I'm just using one of the strands of yarn that I had left over from actually doing my hat. You can use a pop color, whatever you like. So I would cut about a good, I would say, 24 inches of yarn, just to make sure you have enough yarn to make it all the way from one end of the hat to the other. So once you've done that, you're actually going to thread your yarn through the eye of your needle. And again, we're using that large eye needle. Once you've done that, you're actually going to knot off one of the ends of your yarn. You're going to want to make sure it's a pretty big and decent yarn so it's not going to get pulled through the actual section of your hat. And once you have that, all you're, like I said, we're going to do is just do a straight stitch all the way up the side of your weave to the top portion of the hat. Again, I always like to start on the inside of the weave so your knot is not shown. And make sure when you're sewing this together, your stitches are actually pretty close. Since it's worn on our head, we kind of want to make sure we make this as sturdy as possible when sewing our hat together. So again, I am doing is just doing a straight stitch up the side of my weave to the top portion of my hat. So I will meet you back here in a few seconds when I have completed sewing up the side of the hat. So now I have completed sewing up the entire side of my hat. Now I'm at the stopping point. You could either take this stitch to the very top part of the whole hat and actually sew that hole tighter together with extra stitches, but I'm not going to do that because we will be embellishing the hat here in a couple seconds. So once you've come to the end of your hat, and that's where you cannot stop stitching anymore, you're going to stitch one last time, poke that needle through to the inside, and all you're going to do is just tie off a knot. And all you can do is just simply flip the hat a little bit inside out here, and then you're going to pick a strand of yarn just to do a needle loop knot. All it is, you just tie a circle, pull a knot, and you're going to pull that extremely tight. So here, now we actually have a completed and finished hat. Now you could either wear this as a slouchy hat or you could wear it as a cuffed hat. So this is all that you would just do to create a cuffed hat. So now if you want to do this, make sure your inside is actually very cleaned up and you don't see any of your messy stitches sticking through. And if you see it on this spot where you would like to do the cuff hat, just poke them through to the other side. It makes things a lot easier. So now let's have some fun and let's actually embellish this hat. So here I have made a pom-pom. And you can make pom-poms pretty simple on a pom-pom maker. And I have created a pom-pom for the top of the hat. Now this kind of looks maybe a little bit too big, and all you can simply do, if your pom-pom does end up being just a little bit too big, just go back and readjust and recut some of the fringes of the yarn. It's very easy to do. I love making pom-poms, and they're such a great thing to embellish any type of project. So once you have completed your pom-pom and fixed up all the adjustments, really get it nicely fluffed out, and all you're going to do to attach it to the top of your hat, you're going to find that hole, pull the two strands of the pom-pom through that you left hanging when creating the pom-pom, and all you're going to do, and again, flip your hat inside out here. You're going to thread these two strands of yarn through your wide-eyed needle, and then you're just going to sew in and attach this to the hat itself. since the whole opening of the hat is so big, we really can't just pull a tight knot. So all you're going to do is just loop it through a couple stitches of the top portion of the hat, or even in the weave itself. And all you can do from there, make a loop, tie a knot. If you want to make sure extra safe, go through a couple stitches again, make a loop, pull a knot, and then pull it extra secure to make sure it's really, really, really knotted and really stayed structure. And then if you don't feel comfortable about that, just knot it again. So here we've actually completed a really cool, fun, and pom-pom hat. So this is really fun project, and this hat's actually pretty warm itself. If you would like a less thick hat, make sure that you weave with a thinner yarn. So my next hat that I'm actually going to show is a simpler version of involves no stitching and no pom-pom, and you can wear it as a slouchy hat. Here I had already woven a sample for our next hat. This hat's a lot simpler. All we're going to do is just tie the sides together to create our hat itself. Like the last hat that we had completed, I remember I said in the last step that we needed to leave 2 warp strands by themselves. So you're going to pick out your 2 warp strands here at the end of your weave, and all what you're going to do is you're going to pull these again to create the top portion of the hat. Before you do that, make sure you tie off the last portions of your weave. You don't want this coming unraveled at all, because this is the only portion that's not going to be sewn in. So again, you're going to take the top portion of your weave and you're just going to pull. So again, this is so much easier of a hat. And make sure your messy side too is in the inside. I just noticed that. That's a very important detail. So again, you're just going to pull as tight as you can these warp strands together, and that's actually going to create the top portion of our hat. So you're going to knot those off, tie them really, really, really tight, and that's actually the top portion of your hat itself. So now you're left with all this extra scrap here on the side of your hat. So starting at the top, you're going to pull out and just make sure all these extra strands are on the inside of the hat. So now you're actually going to flip your hat inside out, and we're going to tie off the hat. So like other weaves before, I had commented that you need to take a section of 3 pieces of yarn from each side and knot them off. If you notice, we didn't do that in this step before pulling the hat strand together, because we're actually going to do that step now. Again, this step involves no sewing. So again, you're going to take 3 of the warp strands from each side of the weave, and you're going to knot those 2 together, or 3 together. So you're going to take those strands, and all you're going to simply do is knot and pull them together. So again, you're going to go along the whole entire side of this hat, again taking 3 warp strands from each side of the hat and knot them together. So here I've gone and knotted off the whole entire side of my hat. Now the next step from here is that you can also have this fringe displayed on the outside of your hat if you wish, but since we tied it off on the inside, the fringe is actually going to be displayed on the inside of the hat. So now it's nice to kind of get rid of this. This is a lot of extra bulky yarn that we don't really need. So all you can do is just go ahead and trim it all off. Since we've already knotted it, I wouldn't cut the yarn too close to the knot like I've suggested before. So make sure you have this all nice and cut off. And then from here, you can just flip your hat inside out, and your hat is actually complete. So again, this was a step with no sewing. All of it was tying. So now this is actually a really cool slouchy hat to have, or all you can do to make it into a rimmed or cuffed hat is just fold an edge over and then it becomes a cuffed hat. So again, I want to thank you guys for watching my very informative video, how to make hats. And hats are pretty simple to do. It's the same weave, the same length. It's just in the finishing steps of how you want to create it. Either tying the ends together or sewing in the ends and stitching it together. Either way makes a very beautiful and fun hat. So have fun crafting and watch for more videos to come.